have people I know we have people joining us from all over the world today, so good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are joining us from. And welcome to today's webinar on how government can help reboot tourism post-COVID. I'm Siobhan Benita, I'm a former UK civil servant, and I'm delighted to be chairing this webinar on behalf of Global Government Forum, which is a publishing house that serves civil servants all around the world, and our knowledge partner today, MasterCard. Now, in terms of today's topic, tourism is reopening in many countries post the pandemic. And as visitors return, countries and governments have the chance to look at how they support this vital sector and consider new approaches to make tourism more sustainable, more inclusive, and economically beneficial. Today, we're going to look at some of those approaches that are being developed in different countries, and our experts on our panel will share thoughts on how governments can support businesses to benefit from changing tourism trends, whether that be through investing in skills, technology, or deeper analysis of what today's visitors want from their experience. We have an absolutely stellar panel with us here today. We're going to hear from 5 brilliant speakers, and I'm going to introduce them in a moment. But this is also your opportunity as our audience to put your questions to this panel. So once we've heard from our speakers, we will take Q&A from the audience. So whichever device you are using, you should find a Q&A tab somewhere on that device. Please use that Q&A feature at any point from now on to message in your questions, and we will get through as many of those as we can before the end of today's webinar. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce our wonderful panel. So first we will hear from Nick Jones. Nick Jones is the Executive Director of the South Australian Tourism Commission's Destination Development Group. Nick has played a key role in increasing the accessibility to South Australia, attracting new hotel and infrastructure development and regional tourism development. He oversaw the introduction of new international airlines to South Australia, record cruise visitation growth, and the development of the South Australian touring routes to capitalise on the significant self-drive market. Then we head over to the Philippines, where we'll hear from Ramil Basul, who is Chief Tourism Operations Officer in the Department of Tourism over there in the Philippines. Ramil is currently spearheading the formulation of the National Tourism Development Plan and the National Ecotourism Strategies and Action Plan for 2021 to 2028. He's also part of the development of the Department of Tourism's information system, which is aimed at digitalising the knowledge services for the department. Then we will hear from Asha Kugati, who is Vice President of Government and Business-to-Business Vertical at MasterCard Australia and New Zealand. Asha joined MasterCard in 2018 after 11 years in Citigroup. And Asha's prior career in transaction banking at Citi provided her with experience in payments, cash management, treasury and trade solutions serving global organizations. And her current role at MasterCard provides her with the opportunity to learn about new technologies, about tracking and traceability and event-triggered payments. All of these can help understand how customers can thrive in this sector. Then we head over to Wellington in New Zealand to hear from David Perks, who is General Manager for Tikina Commercial Development at Wellington City Council in New Zealand. He's also the Chairperson of Regional Tourism New Zealand, a 31-member organisation that represents the local government investment in tourism all across New Zealand. And amongst many other hats that he wears, he's the chairperson of Wellington's iconic tourism attraction, the Wellington Cable Car, and a board member of Visa Wellington on a Plate, and I love this, Beer Vanna, which is New Zealand's largest culinary and craft beer event. Jan Hutton is Chief Executive Officer at the Australian Tourism Data House. So last but not least, we will be hearing from Jan. Jan has a proven track record of delivering strategies that enhance competitive positioning for companies and countries with particular expertise in unlocking opportunities within travel and tourism. She's got quite a stellar CV. She was CMO of South African Tourism, CMO of Deloitte Consulting Africa, CMO of Destination Gold Coast, amongst many others. So her career path has been a bit unconventional, but always with a focus on digital transformation, marketing, and place development. So I'm sure you'll agree with me. We really do have a quality panel with us here today. Please do, as I say, take this opportunity as you listen to what our panelists are saying, message in any questions that you have, and we will get through as many of those as we can this morning. But now I'm going to invite Nick to give us some opening thoughts. Over to you, Nick.
Thanks very much, Siobhan. And look, welcome, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Starting off, what a ride this COVID pandemic has been. And I'm really pleased to be able to share some of the Australian experience with you today, and some of the actions we took from a government perspective, and how things are looking moving forward as we start to emerge and look not only across Australia, but across the world for opportunities. I thought it'd be a good start to just give you a little bit of a pre-COVID analysis of where we were placed. In around 2015, we'd set a target of $8 billion in tourism expenditure by 2020. If we could achieve that, that was actually up to 40,000 jobs in the tourism sector in South Australia. At the time, very significant growth. I think we were at about 4 billion, so it's almost a doubling of what those existing numbers were. December 2019, we reached that $8 billion target. Things were looking fantastic. Airlines were growing, tourists were flying in from around the world. Countries were really seeing not only Australia, but South Australia. We hit into early 2020 and we know what happened. It fell off the cliff. It literally fell off the cliff. And our concern at the time was that we were not going to have a tourism industry on the other side of COVID. It was a very, we look back now and things are getting a bit easier day by day. Things are opening up. But if you go back a couple of years, it was pretty scary. It was a pretty scary time in the world. We were very concerned that we weren't going to have a tourism industry. We knew aviation was in trouble. We knew cruise industry was in trouble. But literally there was 18,000 businesses in the tourism sector in South Australia that we didn't think many of them were going to get across the other side of COVID. It was devastating. So government had to get involved. We quickly turned our focus to domestic tourism and particularly intrastate tourism. It's worth noting also for our overseas friends that Australian states, the 6 states of Australia, had different COVID rules in each of them. So it was not like Australians could move around the country. We're actually in lockdown in each of our states because of COVID. So our only market were South Australian people. So we quickly moved to marketing them. The other research we'd had done around May 2020 showed that South Australian or tourists were happy in their own vehicle up to 3 hours from their place of residence. That showed aviation trouble. They were not going to get on tour buses. They wanted to be in their own vehicle up to 3 hours. If things went wrong, they could quickly get back home. So government got involved in focusing on those intrastate tourists. Those who may traditionally go to Bali or Europe or somewhere else in the world for their holidays, their option was South Australia. And we're really pleased to see they liked what they saw. They really liked South Australia, and that bought us time. That bought us time to keep dollars flowing, keep these businesses moving, and to, I suppose, deal with COVID, look to how we're going to support those tourism operators. It bought time. We then put in appropriate stimulus to keep tourists moving. And we did that once again to South Australians. That further stimulated people to travel. And also The other concerning thing, we had a number of new hotels open in Adelaide, new Sofitel, those sort of larger hotels. We had to make sure that they were also, one, could trade, but we also wanted to make sure that they had staff and they were ready to go when the bounce back did happen. Fast forward, we sit here today, we've had some all-time record regional accommodation figures in South Australia across our 11 tourism regions. We have seen 70+% occupancy in our CBD hotels, some of the highest rates we know in Australasia. It's been a good story, but it really was devastating. It's all right to sit here today and say, hey, things are looking really bright, but I know everyone out there has been through significant times, both personally and from a business perspective. But we're really pleased. We're sitting here very positive. We're very positive about the future. We do want to try and keep some of this domestic spend, this intrastate spend, as we move forward. And as countries open up, we've taken the opportunity to look at our international markets and to recalibrate, and are they still appropriate on the other side of COVID? And as countries are opening, we're seeing aviation access grow. We've been active in all those countries during COVID. I'd use the term, we kept the lights on, minimal amount of activity, but we're ready to move quickly. The biggest challenge, there's a challenge on the horizon, is staffing. And it's right the way through all supply chains from a tourism perspective. And we'd all know even more widely than that, if you're trying to build a house or renovate a bathroom or build a kitchen, there are problems in every sector. Tourism is not immune from that. We're seeing big challenges in that space. Opportunities, a couple of areas we're focusing on. I'd love to hear some of the feedback from people, but two areas in particular. One is sustainability, which fits beautifully with the Australian broader brand. We are wide open spaces. We are embracing renewables. We're a place that wants to, protect wildlife, and particularly from a South Australia perspective, where we work on an expenditure target more so than a volume of tourists. And the other opportunity is wellness, and a word we've heard a lot come out of COVID. People are checking in with themselves. Am I well? Is my family well? What am I eating? What impact am I having on the planet as I travel around? Who's manufacturing the goods I'm purchasing as I'm moving around? So out of great challenge comes opportunities, and we see some tremendous opportunities, not only for South Australia, but Australia as a whole. So exciting times, but boy, it's been a scary ride.
Thank you so much, Nick. What a great way to start. You really summarized it well. It's been a roller coaster of a couple of years, I think, but lots that you said that I think will resonate with the audience, which I'm sure other panelists will pick up on as well. So that kind of just the scale of businesses that were involved. This is a sector that's a huge sector. You mentioned 18,000 businesses in South Australia alone affected. So governments have to get involved. They have to look at how they can support this. Really important for the economy. That pivot to domestic tourism, is that something that will continue now as a legacy from this period? But then looking ahead, positive in terms of some of the opportunities, but big challenges, as you say, in terms of staffing, in terms of supply chain issues. But also there may be we'll hear more, I think, on some of the trends going forward, people being more conscious travelers, looking to impact on themselves and the environment. So what impact are they having in their kind of tourist activities? Thank you so much, Nick. A great way to set the scene with that opening presentation. Ramal, I'm coming over to you now.
Yeah. Thank you, Siobhan. All right, next slide. Okay, a pleasant day to everyone. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me.
Ramal, you might just need to speak slightly louder if possible. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Right. Saying that the Philippines has been greatly affected by the pandemic would not really describe the magnitude of that effect. In 2020, according to a study by the World Economic Forum, re- um, we are only second to the United States in terms of tourism employment. So you could imagine the closing down of the borders led to the loss of jobs and quite several businesses. This was aggravated by the fact that many of our tourism enterprises are micro to medium enterprises, small and not having many capitals or a lot of capitals, which were unable to support their operations with the restrictions made. The scenario, of course, led our government to come up with the Tourism Response and Recovery Program. During its update in 2021, it was important for us to understand how the stakeholders survived in 2020. Policies will have to be adjusted as a response to that learning. Secondly, believing that the pandemic will start to dissipate, we have to recognize green shoots of recovery in the markets. Okay, well, the question is, can we make those grow? Understanding the prospects and the challenges might lead to a better suited recovery program. According to our research, some of the major challenges in the tourism restart in the Philippines is that it's difficult to promote and host visitors due to inconsistent local government protocols. So a lot of a lot of islands, different policies. Then there's also the problem of costly reopening of businesses due to the lack of clear roadmap at the destination level. They wouldn't know if it will open or not, so they don't have any clear plan of opening.
Mm.
And then lastly, there's also this lack of funds or network access to shifting to digital platforms or digitization of their processes, especially for micro to medium enterprises. So the updated tourism response and recovery program must also reflect what the stakeholders consider as priorities for the next 12 months. Next slide, please. Responding to the challenges, the Department of Tourism came up with its three objectives and corresponding action plans. You may click it, ma'am. All right. So one of the objectives is the safety and protection of tourism workers and visitors. It was also important that the communities hosting the destinations are also protected. Plans were made to make local destinations and their stakeholders ready to accept visitors. The government also came up with required safety protocols to protect everyone in the local destinations as they slowly open up to the visitors. The national and local governments came up with online registrations for both the international and domestic visitors to be able to control the coming of visitors in the destinations. So second, the efforts must be made to directly support the recovery of the tourism enterprises and tourism jobs. The government provided mechanisms that enabled enterprises to survive. This leads to livelihood protection, of course. And even during the pandemic, infrastructure development did not stop to make way for the recovery of the sector. Lastly, to make conditions better, programs should lead to the restoration of the market's confidence to travel. Aside from launching new marketing campaigns even during the pandemic, the DOT also initiated repackaging of products, making them more suitable for the new behaviors of the tourism markets after the pandemic. Next slide, please. The year 2022 not only marked the reopening of the destinations in the Philippines, but it was also the national and local election year. So you could imagine the changes that we have to go through this year. Hence, we also experienced the changing of the guard, so to speak, amidst the recovery campaign. Fortunately for us, the new president and our new tourism minister recognized the importance of tourism in the fast recovery of the economy as a whole. The president has made their commitment to support the recovery of the sector with a revitalized infrastructure program that will be focused on building jobs, and making our destinations accessible to everyone, especially the domestic. One particular direction that the president has committed to that I like is the emphasis on the revival of the creative industries of the Philippines, like weaving, pottery, and the other visual art forms. The priority policies of Secretary Frasco, our new tourism minister, rest on three things: connectivity, convenience, and equality. To improve convenience, the department must facilitate ease of travel through unified protocols, enhance tourism experience, and establishment of more service areas and health facilities so that the visitors will be confident in visiting our destinations. For connectivity, the department shall strengthen its convergence with other relevant government agencies that feed infrastructure development, including soft infra like communications, which is really very important even during the pandemic times. It shall continue advocating tourism clustering to maximize local destination product offerings, and intermodal connectivity framework will be developed by the department to make transportation hubs to and from the destinations more connected, so more logical in a way. Lastly, the minister has directed the department to bring tourism development to more local destinations, giving more chances for others to enjoy the fruits of tourism. Tourism product offerings must be presented with integrated cultural or environmental conservation values, making them more multidimensional. I'm also um, I'm also glad that Australia is also doing this, but we're also trying to maximize fruits from domestic tourism, which I think is the backbone of our tourism industry. Thank you, Ms. Shiva.
Thank you, Ramal. Thank you so much. I think that ties in really nicely, builds on segues from what Nick was saying as well. So lots of stuff that you said there. Interesting to hear the challenges, though, that you had specifically in the Philippines. So that the issue of the governance issues, different islands having different rules, making that kind of hard to govern, but also inconsistent for travellers. So not giving
Yes.
travellers certainty about what they need to do. Something then that in your looking forward, that sense of connectivity and more consistency across departments, across regions, will maybe improve the experience for the traveller. But also, I think something that will come up later as well, you mentioned digital, so how you've gone online, registrations online as well, and digital being part of that vision for the future, I think really important. And then finally, what you said there, I think really interesting about the need for kind of buy-in from senior politicians and obviously
That's true.
senior officials as well to a strategy going forward. Thank you so much, Ramal, for giving us that slightly different perspective. Lots already in those first two presentations. Now, Asha, I'm coming over to you.
Thanks, Yvonne. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everybody out there. My name is Ash Gigadi. I'm based in Sydney. I head up what we call our government engagement team for MasterCard. You might be surprised to hear that MasterCard globally has worked on over 1,000 initiatives with over 60 countries in the short space of 3 years that we've started focusing on this government engagement team. So a number of you are no doubt thinking, why MasterCard? How can a card network help support governments and around the globe and also in the tourism space? Well, as you've heard before, Apple is not just a fruit, Amazon is not just a river, and MasterCard is, of course, not just a card scheme. Much of our ability has to in order to support governments has to do with this shift to digital, and Ramal has just touched on it there as well in terms of how there's a requirement to move to the digital ecosystem. And the pandemic has of course accelerated that. In the past 2 years, we've seen more digitization across payments and customer experiences in general than we have in the past decades. Governments have moved really quickly to protect people, businesses, and their economies. And we've been able to support governments in much of that. We've supported governments to transform the way they've interacted with their citizens. Many governments have turned to digital for the first time to deliver welfare payments or even to deliver credit facilities to small businesses to ensure that they can continue to survive during the pandemic, and of course to provide economic stimulus to wide groups of the citizenship. How has this work translated in practice? MasterCard and the governments have supported over 1.5 million families in Argentina to receive digital meal vouchers. Over 1 million small businesses in Turkey have received financial support and access to credit through Mastercard solutions. And over 5 million daily travellers in Cairo get to their destination more easily and seamlessly through using a transit system which utilises Mastercard technology to tap and go. These are just some examples of technology solving real life problems for people around the world. We've worked to do the same in the tourism industry. And in the Pacific Islands, we've worked with governments and small businesses in the tourism ecosphere to increase digital payment acceptance and to help them to serve better their international travellers who want to use digital payments when they're travelling to those destinations. We know that tourism is essential to the economies around the world. Pre-pandemic, 1 in 10 jobs were provided by the tourism industry. And Mastercard is a really strong believer in supporting this sector because we know in this sector, women, young people and small businesses make up a majority of the ecosystem. And because of the downturn we've seen, these groups of individuals have been disproportionately impacted. And these are sectors that we're focused on in our inclusion work. At Mastercard, we believe that supporting small business can drive economic growth and inclusion, particularly given that small businesses make up 80% of the ecotourism system around the world. Mastercard is proud to be working with the UN World Tourism Organization to support the industry and the ecosystem of small businesses. We've partnered with the UNWTO on the SME Digital Futures Program, which has an ambition to reach at least 2 million SMEs. As part of the program, we've really focused on how do we help businesses to become digital and how do we help them to make a digital assessment of themselves and to access the skills and solutions that they need to thrive in the new economy. And that may be to enact programs such as working with universities to ensure that people who work in the tourism industry also have the ability to do things such as social media marketing. We've seen evidence that small businesses that digitised during the pandemic saw an uplift in 5% of their sales revenue versus pre-pandemic levels. So, really being able to thrive and survive during the pandemic because of the digitisation. So we want to make sure that small businesses in the tourism industry and other industries can continue to do that in the future. And what about consumers and the tourists themselves? What have we seen that they're looking for? So we've been thinking about not only equipping the sector, but also thinking about how do tourists want to interact when they travel somewhere. And Ramal touched on, the ease of traveling, the convenience factor, and of course, digital has much to do with that. Digital experience has much to do with that. The tourism economy in Asia Pacific is facing the slowest recovery of any region, much of it because of the distance of travel to get there and the time it takes to come out to Asia Pacific from the European and North American destinations. And what we found is that seems to be making public-private partnerships essential to getting this industry in this region back on its feet. And of course, a slow recovery does not reflect demand at all. Our spend and transactional data continues to show that the passion for travel and experience in new places remains stronger than ever. Sectors such as restaurants, airlines and lodgings have seen double-digit spend growth over the first half of 2022, demonstrating that the pent-up demand is there and people want to travel, with forward bookings looking really strong. As the industry rebounds, we have an opportunity to work together towards a more sustainable, resilient and inclusive tourism industry. It's really a chance to rethink tourism, which you'd all be aware was the theme of yesterday's World Tourism Day. Rethinking tourism to ensure a sustainable, resilient and inclusive tourism industry is what Mastercard is aiming to achieve through what we call our tourism innovation hubs. We announced some of this work earlier this year. These innovation hubs build on our technology and data insights and working with partners globally, both across the government and private sector. We're leveraging our trusted network and leading technology solutions to drive the recovery of the global tourism industry. The work we do in the new tourism hubs reflects the company's commitment to enable more sustainable growth and build resilient economies across the globe. And we're, of course, creating priceless possibilities for discovery and connection that fulfill the consumer's desire to do good and leave a positive impact on the destinations which they visit. Our aim is really very much to work together with governments and the private sector to help put every destination back on every traveller's map. I'm looking forward to our next two speakers as well and to hear from the audience on how we can work together to drive the industry into its next growth phase and to understand from all of you, both on the panel and in the audience, on the role we in the private sector can play to support the industry. Thanks, Siobhan.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Asha. Really, really interesting to hear how many countries you're working with on how many different kind of initiatives as well. And you obviously mirrored some of what Nick and Ramal had been saying around the data that you have supporting that sense of the demand is there. People want to travel, but they want to travel potentially in a more sustainable way, that's a big issue for people. And you mentioned the innovation hubs there that MasterCard are part of. I'm sure we can send people who are registered for this webinar details of those afterwards so that they can go and check those out as well after this webinar. Thanks so much, Asha. David, over to you now.
Kia ora, everybody. It's great to see everybody here this evening. And interesting to hear what the speakers so far have had to say. I guess New Zealand is probably the world's most remote landmass, and that's a good thing and a bad thing when you have a pandemic. It was easy to isolate ourselves, much harder to de-isolate ourselves. But I think what we did see during the pandemic was that New Zealanders were really keen to travel. And so what we found was that whenever we weren't locked down, that domestic tourism went off. We saw New Zealanders traveling like they never had before, but in no way able to replace the significant spend that international visitors had brought to New Zealand prior to the pandemic. So immediately government support kicked in. And I do say immediately, it does seem, looking back, as though decisions were very easy to make in those darkest days of 2020's lockdowns. And the Tourism New Zealand, our national tourism organisation, pivoted their spend into the domestic market whilst sustaining international relations. And at the same time, government provided money to regional tourism organisations to market, and also money to regional tourism organisations to build the events that would help events replace international visitor spend. Alongside that, as others have described, there was a business support program that provided smaller businesses with the opportunity to get expertise and help through the pandemic. And for larger strategic tourism assets, there was much more significant dollar support of totaling $400 million across the country to make sure that when the return of visitors did occur, that those attractions were still operating and able to offer an amazing experience. One of the things that, with my chair of Regional Tourism New Zealand hat on, that was realised quickly by government was there was no way that government could support every tourism business. So by supporting regional tourism organisations, they were using the interface that local government's investment in tourism provided to businesses right across the country. I think one of the really interesting things for New Zealand was that in 2019, the government had released the 2019 New Zealand Aotearoa government tourism strategy. And actually what government did during the pandemic was speed up a lot of the work that was described in that. And the targets of that work were to build thriving, sustainable regions, to increase productivity in the tourism sector, to ensure that visitors had an exceptional experience when they were visiting New Zealand, to protect, champion, and restore the natural and cultural heritage of New Zealand, and to make sure New Zealanders' lives were improved by the tourism industry in New Zealand. And of course, that is a key part of our current government strategy of ensuring that everything is looked through a for well-being's lens. And a key part of that was then building destination management plans for each region of New Zealand that enabled us to change the focus from being very much consumer driven to actually being community, from very much consumer driven to being very much community driven, and recognizing that communities right across New Zealand did want the prosperity and the vibrancy that tourism brought, but wanted that in a managed fashion that provided jobs that were all year round and careers and such. And then as we've come out of the pandemic, international visitors just coming back to New Zealand, the government has set off on an industry transformation plan that's looking at workforce adaptation for climate change and how the whole of the tourism system is funded. So we're in quite an exciting point as we go into summer here. You know, we still have challenges. Air connectivity remains a challenge for us in our remote corner of the world. And finding the workers to make sure that experiences are amazing. The domestic tourists that were so happy to travel around New Zealand suddenly are able to leave the country and happy to travel around the world. And that government tourism strategy that looks to support all four well-beings, realizing a lot of the architecture of the tourism system in New Zealand government, both central and local, is very much economy and volume based. And how do we make sure that when we're examining the success of what we do, we're actually looking at the impact on our environment and the impact and opportunity that's provided societally to New Zealanders. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, David. As you say, you in a particular position, being as isolated kind of as you were, it gave you a very different COVID experience, I think, but nevertheless, coming out of that, it seems that you've done a kind of taken the chance to have a fundamental look at the whole kind of sector, and some of those issues coming out reflect what other people have said, that kind of increased focus, I think, on well-being and sustainability, on moving, as you said, from consumer-led to communities-led, making sure that as the tourism sector thrives, it doesn't do harm, it actually helps the local communities as well. And it strikes me as well that something that's come up in almost everything everybody said so far, the issue about staffing and workers seems to be a really big challenge going ahead. So I'm sure we'll have questions on that. We're already getting lots of questions coming in, which is great to see. Please keep those coming because we're now on our final presentation, which is over to you, Jen.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be with you all tonight. I've already learned a lot just listening to the panelists, so I hope you are too. I guess, you know, from my side, this incredible industry that we're all a part of, we all thought was a human right. You know, I always believed that travel just made the world a better place. It was our pilgrimage, you know, to transformation as people in many ways. And COVID really did expose the acute vulnerability in Australia and around the world. You know, and tourism has always been very vulnerable, and whether it is a pandemic or it is a weather event or it is terrorism, or tourism has always been very vulnerable. But the extent to which its vulnerability presented, I think, took a lot of us by surprise. Many of the destinations here today will all have a strategy that is similar in terms of, you know, probably 70% of their revenue is always be domestic. This is a global average, and 30% would be international because growth comes from international. But we invested so heavily in international that it actually showed that we didn't have a great, I don't know, resilience, I guess. When COVID hit, we realized how vulnerable we were, and that we'd really serviced a lot of our international markets, and the experience design around our products was geared to get that forex into our countries. So as the CEO of Australian Tourism Data Warehouse, which is essentially a very, very unique tourism intranet in a way, it's a marketplace between supply and demand. My shareholders and board members are the CEOs of the states across Australia. They own our platform, so it's owned by government. It's Australian owned and managed, but it is a for-profit business. And this business that I lead had a really significant role to play. We realized that for us to deliver on, well, our government had, I think, a strategy that was very progressive, a strategy of compassion in many ways that did look to, you know, maximize programs like JobKeeper. It was really innovative in rolling out statewide voucher programs, and came up with really innovative ways to try and, as much as possible, preserve some level of conversion at the time where we were just hearing one heartbreaking story after the next, and industry was really on its knees, and it needed government to step in and come up with really meaningful solutions that were tactical. It would not just be about marketing. That was almost just too far up the funnel. It needed solutions that would help this week, this month. The platform that I'm proud to lead is a national platform. We have about 65,000 products on our platform. That's all food and drink, all accommodation, all events, attractions, tours, etc. And we have about 250 distributors around the world. Some of the big commercial people like Qantas and What If, and some other distributors that are really important for us, like our states, New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, who you've just heard earlier on from, and very importantly, Tourism Australia, our national peak body. And the way that we rallied together, I think, was very unique, and a credit to the relationships and the communication across the states. And it wasn't perfect. It really was far from perfect, and there've been many lessons learned, but there was a lot we did right. One of the things that really comes to mind for me was Philippa Harrison, who's the CEO of Tourism Australia, had a very engaged communication strategy with industry directly. As did other CEOs like Steve Cox, CEO of Destination New South Wales, that literally got the whole of New South Wales industry together on a call every single Friday at 3 p.m. It was open to anybody in the industry that wanted an update, whether it was about vaccination rollouts or it was about some other tactical recovery strategies or new data that had presented itself. So I think that engagement played a huge role. And we as a platform played a really important role in the engagement, rolling out our COVID safe plans for our industry. You needed that central management tool to be able to roll out those COVID safe plans and really give our consumer a level of really credible, verified data that showed that those tourism products and businesses were genuinely open and ready to go to do business with them. Also, we've heard a lot about data on this call. Our data strategy is, I guess, gaining momentum right now as we speak. But it's been a really big part of how we are chiseling our national recovery program together. And that's very much our first-party data and looking at our audiences and distribution and understanding how we optimize conversion, because that's what it's really all about. It's about maximizing yield. And the joy I have in my role is that we get to work with industry, which is the supply side, in education, in that communication role that I spoke about. But it's ultimately all about channeling a booking through to those businesses. We have an internal rally cry, I guess, across the business that is all about, if it doesn't land in the balance sheet of one of our businesses, what is the purpose of it? So there's that real supply side, and then on the other side, it's all about how do we give those businesses greater visibility, greater exposure domestically, internationally. We know that, for instance, in Australia, capacity is still very constrained. We're not yet back to 50% capacity, and for a long-haul destination, that's the ultimate challenge. Our marketing can be as exquisite as and high performing as we'd like it to be, but if those basic accessibility challenges are not yet rectified, we've got to be really smart in how we redirect our investment and our energies to really maximize that consumer demand domestically. I won't touch on that right now because we've had lots of people speak to it, but it is causing our industry to course correct and make sure that their service delivery in the face of the staff shortages, and our staff are obviously now aware of the fact that they don't, they're unsure they want to be part of an industry that is quite volatile. That sometimes you have to work really long hours and sometimes pay is below par in other sectors, and they're questioning that. And at the same time, where we've got staff shortages, we're trying to improve service design and experience delivery and industry development to make sure that we can maximize the yield out of our domestic market until that aviation capacity can really start to flow through. Yeah, look, I also think that you've heard there's some great consistent themes, and I think that most countries around the world that I'm in touch with seem to have a lot of similarities. Sustainability was important to us before COVID, but it is now so much more than just some carbon neutral target. It is a much more engaged strategy that is looking to, I guess, drive carbon neutral behaviors, which are vital, but it's also very much about preparation for the future in a climate changing world that is volatile. So again, that's something that we're hoping through some of our partners like Ecotourism Australia, EarthCheck, etc., to roll out those scorecards through our platform to our industry and make sure that we can really raise the maturity of sustainability at an industry coalface level, and make sure that we are ready for that more conscious consumer as things start to build back.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jan. Again, as you say, you've agreed with some of those key messages that others have said about the kind of sustainability, people wanting more from sustainability, but really interesting, fascinating to hear what your organization does and how you kind of sit in that interface between public and private sectors. And I think one of the things you said there, one of the legacies from COVID, I think, is that we saw more collaboration across maybe departments
absolutely.
we haven't seen before, but also more collaboration across public and private sectors as well. And also a different use of data to give public and the citizens confidence in things that government was saying. And I think that's something I hope that will go forward as well. We won't lose that as we come out of the pandemic. Thank you so much to everybody for those wonderful opening presentations. We do already have lots of questions coming in. I've got a very quick question for the panel myself before we go to those audience questions. And it's just, you've all mentioned kind of wellness, well-being, sustainability as things that travellers are going to want going forward. But if you could summarise what you think those big changing trends are, what's the traveller of the future going to expect? What do they expect from a good experience? What do you think that would be, and how has that changed maybe from where we were before the pandemic? Nick, I'm glad to see you're back in the room. I think you had some connection issues there, but you're back. We haven't heard from you for a while. So if you could just, you know, in a couple of sentences, what do you think the traveller of the future is going to be looking for?
And yes, look, I am back, and I apologise, technology lapse there. But look, I think the traveller and the traveller we're seeking is probably a high-end experience seeker, we would class them as, and they are well aware of the impact that travel is making on the destinations they choose to spend their time in. And I think there'll be an expectation that countries are doing the right thing, that they are managing the environment, managing how, if there's wildlife in these areas, that wildlife is protected and cared for. This we'd call guilt-free tourism.
Yeah.
Sustainability in accommodation, off-grid, solar. These things are emerging now in a bit of a buzzword, but they will become the norm. They will become an expectation of the traveller. So it's critical, that we zoom in on that. In fact, the South Australian Tourism Commission had a $20 million tourism industry development fund, and this was the credit of the South Australian government early on in the COVID pandemic. They wanted to build back stronger and also keep jobs moving, keep particularly construction jobs. And this funding was for refurbishment of accommodation, new accommodation, off-grid, new tourism experiences, and those sorts of things. Written into the requirements of any funding application was sustainability. It was a not negotiable in it in fact put people up the top of the list if they were thinking about solar, off-grid, using renewables, how they were interacting with providing tourism experiences and those sorts of things. That was a requirement. So it's a massive opportunity. I mentioned that the South Australian Tourism Commission has an expenditure target. We don't have a target of 20 million visitors. Mm-hmm. In fact, the challenge we have is if you put 1 million people, say, into a place like Kangaroo Island, which is a beautiful part of the world, that would in fact not only ruin the island, it would ruin the tourism experience.
Yeah.
So I think a real challenge is going to be finding that balance between sustainable tourism and also obviously the economic needs and providing job creation.
Really,
but
it's not necessarily, more is not necessarily the best.
Correct, and that we view it as an opportunity. We're in a great part of the world. In Australia, we have a lot of natural resources. We should be playing in this space, and I'm pleased to say that the South Australia is embracing renewable energy and those sorts of things. So it's there's a lot of upside, a lot to like about that.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Ramil, coming back to you. So your idea of what the tourist of the future wants.
Yeah, interestingly, we had this survey, market survey before in 2020. What it's like to be, what do they like to visit if the destination's open? And most of the answers prefer deals with open spaces, adventure, nature type. Maybe because of the restrictions that was in place.
Mm.
But in my observation, during my visit to one of the popular destinations here in the Philippines, I think most are just uh, it's like there. I think there are no major changes in the behaviors of our visitors here. They call it revenge travel, and they would do anything to go back to how they regularly travel before,
Mm.
especially our domestic travelers.
Okay, thanks, Rama. So you're not seeing any major changes, but people kind of wanting to get back to how they were able to do it before.
That's
Asha,
right.
in terms of your thinking though, what do travelers expect from a kind of smooth experience, I think, when they're traveling?
Yeah, I think it comes back to some of the planning that the Philippines are doing there around the digital experiences, and we've seen in consumer landscape, and that's now bleeding over into the business landscape as well, that there's just this very high expectation around digital interactions, being able to get information when and as you need it, real-time notifications, real-time payments if need be. But so I think we're thinking that that will continue to bleed over into additional industries, and tourism will be one of those. So things like we can see that and we can see already in the pipeline that cities are thinking about having apps that talk about that provide a digital interface into what you can do in the city, where you can go. So think of it as the digital app, the Lonely Planet digital app for app guide to a particular city, but one that can give you real-time notifications about where there might be disruptions or problems on a public transport network. So there's that interface with all of the other things that go on in a city. So we're seeing some of that, and of course I think the idea of the priceless experience continues to reverberate, and we maybe potentially saw some of I think we'll probably see a decrease in a little bit of the mass tourism that we saw that really came to a peak pre-pandemic, and there is that demand for unique experiences and special experiences now that people can travel again.
Yeah, thanks, Asha. I guess people's expectations of what digital can do for them in every other aspect of their life will now just transfer over as well to what they expect in their travel experience as well. Thanks. David, your thoughts before we move on kind of the traveller of the future.
Yeah, sure. So New Zealand gets, I think it's 0.1% of the international global arrivals a year. So we like to think we can be quite picky with who we get. And we have a program called the Tiaki Promise, which we put in front of all international arrivals to New Zealand. And really, this is asking visitors to love and care for New Zealand, our land, in the way that we would as New Zealanders, and asking them to engage with our people as friends and visitors, as perhaps to the kind of traditional tourists. So getting that authenticity, we think, is something that New Zealand can do well and can really satisfy visitors who come here with. I guess the other thing that we would like to think that a certain segment of visitors are going to be looking for when they come to New Zealand is work. In February 2019, there were 60,000 people in New Zealand with a working holiday visa. We've just opened the scheme up again. There's about 1,500 back. We know we need those people back to be able to provide those experiences. And of course, they also become part of communities. They pay tax, so they become part of our tourism system. So we want people back who will work here too.
Thanks, David. I like that. Nick mentioned that travelers want to know destinations are doing the right thing, but you're kind of saying as well, you want to know that tourists will be doing the right thing when they come. So it's kind of like a partnership going forward. Jan, very quickly before we move on, your thoughts then of the travel of the future.
Yeah, and I'll be brief. I guess just to add to that, I think it is the same as what it was before. It's just accentuated. I think travel is very much about connection to self, connection to people that we love, and connection to place in nature. And that hasn't changed, but it's amplified significantly. I would say that the only trend that I feel probably hasn't been touched on here, that our data is showing to be absolutely exponential is the fact that due to the complexity and uncertainty and cost of travel, that people are absolutely staying longer, which for us is a good strategy because we lead the national conversion strategy, and it's all about optimizing length of stay. So, you know, a lot of what we do is we don't just focus like a lot of DMOs focus on the pre-travel. We focus very much on engaging in travel to try and influence an itinerary and get people to stay longer, do more things, to spend more, and then post-travel. But the reason that I bring that up is ultimately we're just seeing a lot of consumers are now, I mean, they've got incredible businesses like Deloitte, for instance, and there are numerous, I just use them as a recent example, that are now saying in their policy that wherever you want to go on annual leave, you can tag on up to 8 weeks. So that whole extended vacation has now become an extended workcation, right. And people are staying 2-3 months in a place, which changes a lot in tourism.
Yeah, really interesting. One of the trends there, longer stays, and as David was saying, working holidays as well. So really interesting there. Right, let's head over to the questions coming in from our audience. Thank you to those coming in. The first one came from Akriti Jain, who is from India. And she said she wants to know how tourism can help in recovering the economic destruction done due to COVID. So I think a lot of you have touched on this, but maybe you could reiterate, how is it helping? Why is it so important, I think, to help rebuild some of that economic destruction during the pandemic? And she's asked specifically, Ramil, what the Philippines is doing for local workers, so people working in the tourism industry. But I think all of you can answer that as well. So you mentioned kind of support, but what's happening now for businesses working in local tourism? I'm going to change the order a little bit. David, I'm going to come to you first on this one.
I think the key thing economically is about getting people out and about, spending in our places. And so I think what I've seen across the pandemic is initially when people were coming back into places, that the local tourism organizations were actually doing kind of love local campaigns, getting people to use their own shops, their own cafes and restaurants around them. And then it became kind of sub-regional and then regional and then national and then international. And I think there has been this increased awareness of the importance of looking after each of those markets and not just being a business that relies on one particular segment. And certainly a lot of the work that we regional tourism organizations did during the pandemic was helping businesses work out their diversification strategy so that they could sustain cash flow and jobs through whatever came next. And for some that was big opportunities, and for others it was further challenging times. But I think we are probably reasonably surprised by how few businesses actually went to the wall, because they diversified. Harder in the most remote locations, which relied more on longer term travel. But yeah.
Thanks, David. Before I move on to others, there was a question that came in specifically for you, David, as well, and it was from Lisa Pace. And Lisa has said, emphasised the role played by government in supporting the tourism industry. Can you name any kind of particular institutions that emerged as drivers of change at regional level? And do you think this will result in any kind of lasting changes in the governance architecture around tourism?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, actually. And there's significant discussion that's just been set off by our Minister of Tourism. So in the pandemic, government provided over $100 million to regional tourism organizations, but they only did that if the local government retained their investment in regional tourism organization. So local government did. And then out of that investment, one of the outcomes was the delivery of these regional destination management plans. And now the expectation from central government is that local government will put the actions of those plans into their long-term plans, and that different government agencies, as appropriate, whether it's the Department of Conservation or the Transport Department or whoever, will incorporate that local destination management plan into their work. But what the minister's just talked about is, actually, I've set off all this work and we want to create this more sustainable system where supply and demand are equalized, where seasonality is addressed, where dispersal is more broadly spread. it needs more money.
Yeah.
And so the third leg of the government's industry transformation plan is this examination into how the tourism system is funded and what we need to do to create that vibrancy and prosperity for communities that the strategy had the ambition to do.
Thanks, David. Asha, I'm come back to you on this, back to Akriti's question, because one of the things she asked is, what's the Philippines doing for local tourism workers? But could you give us, you mentioned a couple of examples, I think, where MasterCard is working with governments on helping kind of small and micro businesses in the tourism sector. Have you got any other examples that you could give us of where you think government working with yourselves or others is doing well in this respect?
Other examples, yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, the idea of spreading the skills, the knowledge skills, and ensuring that those in the tourism space have, those who've worked in the tourism space and also have the ability to grow their skills across the digital communications channels, because we know that that's a really important way to recover, or sorry, to focus and target on travellers and bring them into the country. So that's another way in which we're partnering with governments. We've seen governments do that, wanting to certainly ensure that people have a robust set of skills. And then I don't know if you will have seen, hopefully, possibly not you, Siobhan, because you're not in Australia, but we partner with Tourism Australia on a Holiday Here campaign to really very much focus on local travel and ensuring that domestic travel had domestic travellers were looking internally into, you know, across Australia to look at places they could visit here, so that we could help to sustain the demand across Australia.
Thanks, Asha. Yeah, that, I think that domestic travel, that pivot to domestic travel has been hugely significant in terms of keeping businesses going, keeping the industry going during difficult times. Ramil, I'm going to come to you then on the question from Akriti.
Yeah, thank you. To answer the first question, well, tourism is an essential part of the economy of the Philippines, however volatile and uncertain the industry is. But tourism in the Philippines also requires minimal investment, so it would be very easy for everyone to join the industry. However small the economic activity is, it would matter a lot if they would be able to participate. Like so it somehow it revitalized the economy of a local destination, even if it's that small. For the second question, during the pandemic, the government provided programs that would upskill our, well, that's the word right now, it's upskilling our tourism workers. It's like reorienting them with new skills or new requirements for the reopening. But I think the recovering their income was something that was somehow the other tourism workers found ways to look for other jobs, other income, no? And then the problem right now actually is to getting them back to tourism, because somehow them knowing that it's an uncertain industry, they most of the people that were working in the tourism industry before are not returning to the tourism sector anymore. That's why I think it was mentioned a while ago by Sir Nick Jones. The staffing is a problem right now because the other former tourism workers refuse to come back. So we want them to come back, but I think we have to think of incentivizing them or trying to give them a lot of upskilling programs for them to return.
Thanks, Ramil. We might come back to the issue of staffing because this does seem to be a kind of central concern for everybody. But Nick and Jan, I'm going to ask you as well about this issue of kind of, you know, how can you help? How can you help recover the economic destruction due to COVID? But we've had another question come in, which I think links nicely with that. It's coming from Eric Unterwurzacker. And Eric has said, I'm surprised there is not really a concern, or we haven't mentioned it here today, about the consequences of inflation hitting many areas of the world and a possible economic downturn. So I guess as we're asking one question about how can we help recovery is this other now big challenge of inflation and a possible global economic downturn. Is that going to stall the efforts to get recovery going? Jan, I'm going to come to you first, then Nick, and then if others want to come in, please raise your hand, let me know. Jan, over to you.
Yeah, good catch, Eric. I think that you're right. It is surprising it hasn't come up, because there is no doubt that disposable income is being affected. It's being eroded due to the cost of living. And that absolutely does cause our audiences to reprioritize how they spend. And, you know, tourism is still seen very much as a luxury purchase. It is not essential. So there is an anticipation that it will impact on visitation. But I think, just if I link that to the earlier question just slightly, when it comes to how we stimulate economic recovery, from an Australia perspective, the platform that I lead, ATDW, you know, we are essentially that pathway to the digital economy for our businesses. A lot of them don't have the capacity and capability. So in being that pathway, one of the things that we did, very much done through our state partners, is roll out national voucher programs, which made a huge difference, because even though it was in a way a false stimulation, it was provided by government, and it just got, you know, despite some of the apprehension in the sector, it certainly stimulated and got people traveling. And I think that a lot of the vouchers are over, but the pricing strategies that industry is now having to look at, and is it in many ways adjusting to, continues that same mindset of making sure that we are absolutely offering as much value for money as possible. We are aware that, as I said, disposable income's been affected. So ultimately, all I will also say is that it's the same as it was before, in that it is about the right consumer and really understanding the cost of that acquisition of that one visitor. We did a project through Australian Tourism Data Warehouse where we looked at all marketing costs and what it costed each one of those states to just get one visitor. Understanding the cost per booking and the value per booking was essential, and making sure that then, you know, was pro rata the investment, the marketing investment that is, you know, to stimulate and get the industry back economically to where it was before.
Thanks, Jan. So Nick, your thoughts on the kind of economic recovery, but the potential for this inflation now to really cause us a spanner in the works?
Yeah, a few really good questions there. And I was just going to touch on one really good outcome of COVID, if there are any good ones, was that we saw regional South Australia, and I think regional Australia, saw the importance of tourism, including residents who are living out in regions. All of a sudden, those people that, you know, fill up their petrol tank in their car were tourists. Those people in bakeries buying food, in supermarkets, those sorts of things. To turn off those tourists, which happened across Australia for a period of time, showed the importance of tourism. So it was a good learning. I think economic recovery, I mean, we're seeing across Australia, and I think across the world, a lot of automation in farming and other traditional sectors that were labour intensive. Tourism remains labour intensive. It's that personal connection that is part of the tourism. So there's an opportunity there. It supports a lot of jobs, both from a metropolitan perspective, but also in regional, you know, globally. So that's an opportunity. Staffing is the challenge. I think Ramil mentioned that a number of people have moved on. They've found something more solid, more 9 to 5, you know, 5 days a week. We're also, you know, we're even seeing that in travel agents, in outbound travel agents. During COVID, too many staff, not enough customers. Now too many customers, not enough staff. So immense demand at the moment. But it's not a day that goes by without us picking up a newspaper or seeing a television, a news segment about this word inflation. You know, we're hearing it here in Australia today about Britain and some of the challenges ahead. Everywhere is dealing with this. It seems people have been locked up. They are prioritising travel at this time, which is fantastic. as things become more challenging in food costs, power costs, all these challenges, whether travel can maintain that level of demand, time will tell. But I think a learning out of it is keep an eye on the domestic audience as well as that international traveller. If, you know, people can't afford that trip from North America to Australia or Australia to North America, perhaps we can still get them to travel, you know, that 100 kilometres to a caravan park and still have a great family experience and support some jobs. But I think we'll certainly be looking at that balance between international and domestic. And it's important to learn things from COVID. It's not just pretend that it's going to go back to how it was. Take the good learnings out of it as well as the bad learnings.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Nick. David, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I was really going to say, similar to what Nick was saying, is kind of that balance between that diversification that people have learned and how you apply that. But I think there's also a very clear realization here, at least, that the things that a domestic traveller spends their money on, and probably an Australian traveller too, is quite different from people coming from beyond Australia. And that's being really highlighted by product that was very specifically targeting the Chinese visitor. And perhaps that's the other thing we haven't really touched on in this conversation so far, is where both Australia and New Zealand certainly had significant number of Chinese visitors, and those visitors are missing at the moment, and there's no certainty for those businesses that had targeted them.
Yeah, thanks, David. Before we move on to other questions, because I think this one follows on nicely, we just had a question come in from Europorn, I think, and it's a question probably for Asha and Jan, because it's I think it's Australia specific, but some of those government initiatives, I think you mentioned these, Jan, some of these, the Dine and Discover vouchers and the kind of state vouchers, how effective do you think those are in helping the tourism industry?
They were incredibly effective, and they were immediate. So, you know, let me say that different states rolled them out differently, and to that extent, there were probably different levels of success, but they were all successful. The only thing is that the success is short term; it's not a sustainable solution. So the vouchers work really, really well, and they create a kind of false attribution in a way, because we are stimulating that conversion ourselves by giving people a reason to travel at a vastly reduced price. But it's so tactical that, you know, you can roll out the vouchers nationally and they can redeem them nationally in a way that makes it really easy for where they want to redeem them. We've had Dine and Discover, which, you know, it doesn't matter if it's a meal voucher or even movies, but certainly accommodation. And you know, the different states had different strategies. Some were really looking for midweek stimulation, others were all more weekend. So the vouchers were very, very effective. But what I'm saying is that it's not a sustainable solution. It was very effective during COVID. And now, if we were to continue the voucher programs, it would be that they would need to be initiated from industry, not from government. So we did look at whether our technology would be able to facilitate a reverse engineered voucher that is initiated as a token from industry side. And that's the benefit of having our entire industry on one platform. Which is pretty unique. But yes, so I would say that, you know, the voucher programs are great, but it's a short-term solution that is a band-aid to an industry that was crippled. It's not a long-term solution.
Thanks, Jan. Asha, I'm actually looking at the clock. We are heading towards the home stretch. So I'm going to ask you a slightly different question that's coming, because I think it's probably most relevant for you. This is from Anne Benny. And Anne has said, card services and banks are individually looking to leverage insights through transaction data. Would the card or financial sector consider sharing data in the form of a panel or market sample of data to assist tourism and businesses target growth through such insights? So I guess it's the extent to which you're sharing your kind of information and your insights with the tourism sector.
Yeah, I'm not sure where Anne is from, but I mean, it's certainly something, you know, we'd be interested in looking at. We have representation on some of the tourism and travel related boards. So, you know, there's certainly the opportunity for us to broach that. And I I guess our transactional data is across all, not all, but most of the banks in Australia. So it does give you that snapshot across the whole of the country, rather than, you know, a cardholder who banks with a particular bank. So we can see that on a more holistic level. But we'd be open to looking at, you know, what might work best for the industry, how potentially access to a platform for a period of time might work and benefit the industry. But I think that's just a conversation that needs to be had.
Yeah. Thanks, Asha. So I want to come to a question from Lisa Pace. Lisa has addressed this to you, Rangal, but I think it's relevant for everybody. So Lisa has said, can you elaborate on how the Philippines exploited digitalization to design, create and offer integrated tourism offerings, and what were the challenges along the supply chain? So I guess, how do you get everybody in the sector involved in kind of a holistic digital approach that will simplify things for the traveller? So I'm going to put this to you first, Rangal, but I imagine that everybody on the panel is thinking about this. How do you actually get digital services to make that experience better for the customer, but also for the businesses in the sector? Over to you, Rangal.
Thank you, Shobhan. Well, actually, we're not there yet, but during the pandemic, some of the local destinations were able to create online dashboards that enable not only the required registration, but also link them with the usual services needed by the visitors, like accommodation, transportation, and tours. And that is also what happened in the national level. And then there's also this trend of building mobile applications to help with marketing their local destinations. However, these were not booking systems or even financial systems, but just networks, just links. So the next step probably for us is to continue the tourism digitalization in investing online solutions that can integrate booking and payment as well in one dashboard. The challenge really here is making service providers agree to that integration. Multinational and large national tourism enterprises, well, they're already set up digitally. So making them agree, the government must put more incentives there. As for small enterprises, which we do have 80% of them, 80% of the tourism sector, tourism enterprises are micro to medium enterprises. The integrated system might be something that they will welcome, because it's going to be the government that's going to invest on such integrated system. But there will be other stakeholders that will come into play as well, like the local government units, what's in it for them. So with thousands of local government managing destinations, it would be a huge effort indeed for us in integrating such system.
Yeah, so I think the benefits can be seen, but it's that challenge of everybody in kind of space. Yeah. Nick, the role of kind of digitalization, I mean, you mentioned in your opening presentation 18,000 businesses in your area alone. So to what extent is making sure that everybody is digital part of the strategy going forward?
It's been a key play, actually. Siobhan, I was just going to pick up on, before we jump to that, one of Jan's comment. We had what we call a great state voucher here in South Australia. We did 7 rounds of that. That was between $50 and $100 vouchers for accommodation in either metropolitan or regional. The average spend was $500, so it was a 5-to-1 return.
Yeah.
What it allowed accommodation providers to do, particularly large hotels, is keep their staff in place. So when things opened up, they could quickly power back, because we didn't want them to then go through having to try and re-employ hundreds of staff. So very successful, but as Jan says, this is not something sustainable long term, but it was very successful to do what it needed to do at the time. So, but as far as digital, southaustralia.com is our key platform. We delivered 1.7 million leads to tourism operators in the last 12 months. The focus, people have been dreaming and researching and around the world, and we've kept really active, and it allowed us to do that in a commercially sustainable way within budget, but it played a critical role. And I think people have learnt this is the way to research. It's another change in people's behaviours. as we come out of COVID. But it's been hugely beneficial.
Yeah.
Mm.
Thanks, Nick.
Mm.
Jan, you were nodding to some of the stuff that Nick there to what, I mean, obviously you're in the data business, so digital must be a big part of what you do, but have you seen a shift in this?
Digital is the lifeline of tourism. Without online visibility, you simply almost don't exist. It's critical that digital accelerates accessibility in a democratized way to get the industry, cohesively online. And with that, the right capabilities, because industry often doesn't have those capabilities or even the capacity. As we all understand, a lot of them are passionate business owners, they're sole traders, or they're so the digitization for us, we're busy going through a huge digital transformation, and it's rebuilding our entire platform. And it's very interesting. We're working with Deloitte Digital and a lot of credit card data as well, to really make sure that we understand those audiences, we understand the customer decision pathway, to the point that that was mentioned a minute ago by Nick. During our last year of COVID, which our last fiscal, we generated over 12 million leads. And it's only because we have worked over the past few years to get our industry, the maturity of their digital programs to be increased. There's still somewhat of a gap in terms of booking engines, so that we have a strategy that is search engine to booking engine. And there's still a lot of work to be done in making sure that that final step is in place. But by and large, I do feel like as an industry, we've already been working, and it's paying off now over the past few years to make sure that our industry is able to operate in modern, in 2022 and engage a modern consumer, which is vital.
Thanks, Jan. David, you were nodding there in agreement. Your thoughts on digitalization?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. When the government here provided business support systems to tourism, they of course provided support systems to all businesses. And one of the immediate realizations was that business in New Zealand had been riding a wave of growth, and actually most businesses needed 101 help regardless of COVID. And part of that was their digitization. And so the Ministry of Business Innovation and Employment, which tourism is part of, created a scheme called Digital Boost, which has been delivered across the country by economic development agencies and regional tourism organizations. And it's had an amazing take up. So I think there's a hope that that scheme, which has been for all kind of businesses, will have had a real positive impact for tourism. The other thing I just want to talk about, completely different, is that and we're having conversations about it today, that because new systems have been put in place to travel internationally, there's this, we're kind of out of sync digitally, and our immigration systems in New Zealand and how they align with Ministry of Primary Industries and getting across the border, how they align with the airlines that are coming in New Zealand, and actually then particularly of interest to those from Australia. The question of why exactly do we have different visa regimes in New Zealand and Australia, and why do we have to have passports to travel between the two countries? Because actually digitally we know each other extraordinarily well.
Really interesting. Again, that if you
good points,
make things much more consistent and smooth for the traveller, how much easier that would be. Asha, you mentioned in particular kind of women and micro businesses, and Mastercard's been doing a lot to help them. To what extent are those kind of business leaders or business owners being online really important for them in terms of their success?
Yeah, it's absolutely critical, I think, to Jan's point around if you don't have a digital presence, then it's very difficult to attract customers. And so I guess that's why we've been working with the UNWTO to look at how we can support those smaller businesses to become digital, but also to become digital in a really safe way, because of course the other thing that we've seen with the rise of digital is the rise of cyber attacks and increasing number of cyber threats, and of course those will be detrimental, as we can see, to huge businesses, let alone to very small businesses, just how detrimental those types of attacks can be. So that's another area in which we're spending time, is just to make sure that those businesses that we do support to go digital or become digital can also do that in a very safe and secure way.
Thanks, Asha. Well, we are almost out of time, so I think we've got time for just one more question. I'm going to ask everybody to answer it really, really quickly. But thank you so much to the audience so far for sending in all those brilliant questions. But the final question, I think, has to be one on staffing, because this seems to be such a big issue that's come up. So just, I guess, in 30 seconds each, your thoughts on, if this is such a big issue, one, how are you going to attract people back to the industry or to stay in the industry? And what types of skills do you think they are going to need? Because that's an area maybe where our audience in the public sector can help, where government can help. So how are we going to get great people back into the industry, and what skills are they going to need going forward? Ramal, I'm going to come to you first.
Yeah, I think it has to do with repackaging our tourism products to make it more, to put them in a unique selling proposition. The destinations here in Southeast Asia are quite the same. So we do have the unique selling proposition. And then there's also one program that we're trying to do, bringing back the overseas Filipinos and former Filipinos and trying to make them invite their neighbors in other countries to come to the Philippines.
Thanks, Ramal. So creating a USP and trying to encourage people back who maybe have gone elsewhere. Thanks. David, what are you doing to try and attract great staff?
Yeah, it's hard work. And yeah, I think the interesting thing is we could be talking about a completely different part of the economy, and we could be having exactly the same conversation. I think, you know, in the New Zealand scenario, the challenge we have to overcome is seasonality, particularly in our tourism destinations as opposed to our cities, where if you can't provide employment year round, then getting people to remain in the industry is always going to be a challenge. So I think there's short-term things we need to do. We need to find those people with working holiday visas who want to come and spend some time in New Zealand. But long-term, our solution has to be about addressing seasonality and investing in our destinations so that people want to go to them all year round.
Really interesting. Jan, your thoughts on staffing?
Yeah, look, I think it starts earlier. I think we've got to back up. It's about pathway development for young people. It's about really providing that education all the way through, and turning it into a career. That's the problem. Tourism is this thing you do when you're traveling. You know, it's a happy accident. And I think we've got to start professionalizing it. And I think we are. I do think that institutions are really raising the bar, but again, I think that career development and pathway development really needs to be in place. I also think that, you know, we've touched on visas, but for us, the working holiday maker visa is absolutely essential. And then lastly, I'll just say that one of the beauties of our platform, and can I just say that I get phone calls probably once a week from different countries around the world asking if we'd be prepared to white label this platform ATDW, because it really is unique. And it's actually something that we very genuinely are considering. But the reason I bring this up is because we could adjust when we realized that there was a real workforce shortage. In fact, South Australia, and I'm sure Nick's across this, contacted us and said, well, we'd like to actually, instead of just having our profiles, think of our platform as an Airbnb profile equivalent. So, you know, images, photographs, copy the normal profile of a business. Instead of that, could we also put a badge on that profile that shows that they've got a job vacancy? So simple.
Interesting.
So now suddenly, not only were we actually marketing products and tourism experiences around the world, but we had them badged if there was an opportunity. So we were actually facilitating recruitment, and people were applying internationally, which is really made a difference.
Very innovative. Thanks, Jan. Asha, slightly different. What would you be advising government, I guess, from your perspective, on looking at what skills do you think staff in the industry need?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that I'm going to say digital in this in response to this, because we have touched on it a lot. Yeah. But I would just like to say that David's absolutely correct. You know, this isn't a problem that's unique to the tourism industry. We see it in our industry as well. And I think to Jan's point around career paths and giving young people a view of where they're going next, that's important in every industry. So you know, it just as it is in ours, I would think it would be across tourism as well.
Thanks, Asha. Nick, we started with you. I'm going to end with staffing.
Thank you. No, I think Jan captured it really well there. I agree. I think it's getting to kids at 14, 15 years of age about the diversity of tourism as a career opportunity. that it's not just a tour guide. There are so many elements within tourism, from supply and demand chains. But I think importantly too, industry is going to have to start paying the benefits to compare with other jobs. David mentioned seasonality. It can't be this $15 an hour cleaning job that you've got, 5 hours a day. It's got to actually provide the benefits and the stability to become a career. Now we're paying that at the moment because we have to pay that, as everyone is paying that in every industry. If tourism's to be a serious sector, we're going to have to pay more, and that will ultimately mean the consumer will pay more for the experience.
So a kind of realism check there. Thank you, Nick. Thank you so much. I have to say, we had a comment in from Lisa who said, what a brilliant panel you have been, and I can only agree with that. So thank you. Unfortunately, we are now out of time. To the audience, thank you so much for sending in your wonderful questions. A questionnaire has gone out to all of you. Please do take a couple of seconds to fill that in, because it means we can give you the types of webinars that are most useful for you in the audience. As you'll see, there's some details of one of our next webinars coming up, all about AI, helping public sector to save money. But on our website as well, there are lots of details about other webinars coming up if you enjoyed this one. We will also send you a link to this video so you can watch it all again, or share it with your colleagues if you think they will be interested in watching that. And there will be an article in a couple of weeks with the key points from today's conversation, and we will send that to everybody who registered for today's webinar as well. But just leaves me to say a huge thank you to our audience. So to Nick, to Ramal, to Asha, to David, and to Jan, thank you so much for giving us all of your time and your expertise today. It was a fascinating conversation, lots of challenges, but lots of things to be positive about. Thank you to MasterCard for being our knowledge partner. And I hope to see you all again very soon on one of our webinars in future. Have a good afternoon, evening, or rest of the day, wherever you are, and bye for now. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
Yeah.